Hi, we're back with the bouncing ball tutorial. Okay, so what do we have here? This is what you're going to do, basically speaking. Nice, that's it. Like literally every animation tutorial, every animation course begins with something as easy or seemingly easy as bouncing a ball across the screen. You're gonna do the same thing only in 3D next semester, next year on your 3D animation course as well, bouncing a ball. Um, it looks, as I've explained, relatively simple, but during the course of animating this ball and its behavior as it bounces less and less and more frequently, you're going to learn how to control keyframes, how to control interpolations, how to control these objects in space. In this case, the space of a frame, and in the case of Maya, it's going to be in your Maya scene, but you get the idea. Okay, so let's begin. And let's begin with organizing. Because if you look at my project folder, it's relatively small right now. Like this is the recording ongoing in the background right now. So it is my screen recording. Forget about it. But I have my bouncing ball After Effects file over here. And over here I have a materials folder. And in this materials folder, I have a bunch of files. Like I found two basketballs, just doing a Google image search. And then over from a website called Pexels, I found this free background image, let's say. Find a similar file and always check out the dimensions. Like this is a really big file. You don't need it to be this big, but remember, we're going to be working in a 1920 by 1080 canvas or composition. If I go over to here and right click to composition settings, you'll see that this is 1920 by 1080, otherwise known as Full HD resolution, right? So if we don't want it to be pixelated or looking like trash basically, we have to find a good sized image. Same goes for the ball, but it doesn't have to be that large because it's going to also appear on the screen really small as well. Okay, so let's begin setting up this file and getting ready for the animation. Over here I'm going to say new project, so I can start a new. I'm not going to save it. Okay, so I need a new composition before anything else. I'm going to right click, hit new composition, switch this to 1920 by 1080, square pixels, frame rate is 20, duration, let's keep it just 10 for now. The previous animation, the example animation you just saw wasn't 10 seconds long, so it doesn't have to be 10 seconds in the end. And I'm going to call this bouncing ball. Okay, that's it. Ready. And then I have to import my materials. I have the background image. I'm going to drag and drop over to my project pane over here. Okay. While we are at it, I have to create a folder. Now, I don't have to create a folder, but this is good practice, and I want to learn this practice, basically. I'm going to call this materials, okay? And I'm going to put it inside of it, all right? So I can control, if things get out of hand, and they will get out of hand when you're dealing with lots of images, lots of source material, you want to organize your stuff. Maybe you can, name this folder images. You can name your pre-comp folder pre-comps, so that you can easily turn them on and off to quickly go through the project. Okay, also I want to get a basketball. Now this basketball, for instance, is already a PNG file. It's cut out, but I don't like the quality of it, and in the meantime I can use this example, which is just an image like this. It is not cut out from its background or anything. I can use this image to showcase how you can cut it out using masks inside After Effects. All right, let's drag and drop this in. And unfortunately, this is a raw file, so it's going to come with this raw adjustment. So I'm not going to do anything, like just hit OK. If you find a file like AVIF file, it is basically a raw image. It's an adjustable dynamic image, so it's okay. Just go with it, or find a JPEG or a PNG, doesn't matter. Okay, let's drag and drop this over here. Okay, as you can see, its type is camera raw file. But right now it is adjusted, ready to use, nothing's wrong with it. Okay, let me drag and drop this in. And immediately, as you can see, this image itself is cropped. The reason why is that if you go take a look at the materials, it's relatively large. This is 5,600 pixels by like 3,700 pixels. It's way, way larger than our canvas size. So we have to scale it down. Okay? If you use your scroll wheel to zoom out, you can see the actual size of it. Now you can use this area over here, and if you press nothing on the keyboard, this is non-uniform scaling, but if you press shift and drag, you can easily scale it. An alternative method to that, and a more preferable method sometimes, is using this area over here. If you just click on this arrow icon over here, you will see the transform menu. It may come as closed, okay? So just hit transform, and over here we have the anchor point, this point in the middle. Its location is important. Position, which is this, as you can see, as I slide it around, it keeps changing. We have the scale. Right now, these two values, the X and Y scale, are linked. Okay, you can break this link to create a non-uniform scale. Okay, we have the rotation, and we have the opacity. And since the background is black, it is, when it becomes transparent, you see more of that black. It is not turning off, it is losing its opacity. So if there was any other layer underneath it, you would start seeing it. Basically how it works in Photoshop. Only in this software, everything is dynamic, everything is editable, everything is calculated on the fly. So basically speaking, there is no method of what we call destructive editing in After Effects. In Photoshop, if you change the pixels, that's destructive editing. If you don't get that back, you will never recover those pixels in that file. But in here, everything is dynamically editable, especially if the object in concern is referenced from outside. How that is referenced doesn't change. The file itself isn't touched. How it is perceived and how it is modified is what matters in After Effects. Okay, so let me scale this down a bit more. And if I scale it down too much, obviously it's going to appear as just a photograph inside this entire frame. You get the idea. This is nothing new to you. Okay, so this is good enough. I'm happy with this. So what I want to do is introduce my ball to this scene and also start, playing around with it, playing around with its position, right? So I have to assume some area in this frame is going to be the ground. Okay, for ease of reference, let's mark it. If I hit Ctrl R on my keyboard, similar to how it is in Photoshop, yet again, it is going to turn on the rulers. You can alternatively go into where, let me try to find it, maybe in view. Yeah, in view, show rulers. It's going to show the rulers. And if you left click on one of the rulers and drag it, you're going to be able to drag a guide. Let's drag a guide over here. This is like maybe over here. This is good. Let's imagine that this is going to be our ground, the position of the ground as the ball bounces on the surface. Okay, so this is going to be the ground. It's good to reference this line because it's going to keep on that line as it touches the ground. Okay, so if I drag the basketball to my scene, to over here or to over here, doesn't matter. Okay, right now it doesn't appear because it is underneath this layer. Okay, so I can, similar to how it is once again in Photoshop, I can readjust the position of this layer and put it on top. But here we have a problem. I mean, I can bounce this ball around, but it's going to come with this white background. So I want to get rid of this background. Okay, so how am I going to delete all of this white area around it? As I mentioned previously, you cannot delete anything in this object in a non-destructive way, or a destructive way, sorry. You can only do it in a non-destructive way. A non-destructive deleting operation can only be handled with vectors, right? And in this case, those vectors will create a mask, a dynamic mask with points that you will have to edit. Okay? So if nothing is selected on the screen, nothing is selected among your layers, let's say, let's click in the empty area and then grab this tool, which is the pen tool, shortcut G, and if you start drawing on the screen, you're going to create a shape layer, basically speaking, okay? You've just created a shape layer. Let's Control Z to get this action back, okay? Let's get rid of the shape layer. But if you click on any layer and then draw on it, it is going to create a mask. It is going to work in the masking mode, okay? So when you start clicking, it is going to start drawing a shape that will behave as a mask to this image. So let me do this first. I'm going to go in and just click on here and then click and drag to create a curve. And if you press space, press and hold space, you can pan around, which is very useful, okay? Press space and pan around. And if you click once, it is going to create a kink. It's just a sharp point. But if you drag, it is going to create a Bezier curve. Okay? I'm going to adjust those handlebars later. So I'm not overly concerned with their accuracy right now. Okay? I'm just creating these curves. Okay. Okay, and okay. All right. So right now, for example, I want this to be Bezier with adjustable handlebars on either side, right? So I have to change the type of point. So if I go to this menu again and select Convert Vertex tool and click on it once, it is going to change into Bezier mode. Now, if I want to adjust all of these handles, I have to grab the selection tool, shortcut V, and start dragging them. But the problem is, since this mask is already doing what it's intended to do, cutting the unnecessary, the unwanted space, I cannot accurately see how this circle, how this line group, basically how this shape encapsulates that bowling ball. Okay? So in order to control, until I'm done with this, in order to control that mask more accurately, I'm going to go into mask settings over here. See, this is mask 1. And if you don't like the color of it, maybe it is not visible against the ground or against the background or against this red ball over here. Maybe it's in, red color or something, which makes it harder to see. You can change the color of it. Okay, let me select a very sharp color. Maybe the green was good. Okay, then I'm going to switch this mask from add mode to none. Okay, so mask can behave in different ways, and you can create more than one mask for a single image. Therefore, how they interact with each other, like, is it additive? Is it subtracting from everything? Is it intersecting with other masks? It is lightening, darkening, creating a difference, whatever. You're going to mostly use add and subtract modes and maybe every now and then intersect. But none is very useful when you're in the middle of modifying your mask. So let's select this and start adjusting these handlebars so that it covers as much area as possible. Take your time. You don't have to be quick about this. Okay? And don't worry trying to be pixel perfect, because we can always fix it later in fine adjustment. Okay. All right. Looks good. Let's adjust it over here. Okay, let's go back here. right? And yeah, good enough. Okay. Okay. I mean, maybe a few more fine adjustments here and there. Okay, if you lose the, line, I pressed space and it started playbacking, even though there's nothing to playback because there's no animation yet. It's fine. Okay, and if you click this icon over here, toggle mask and shape path visibility, it turns it on and off. But if you deselect the layer, it's going to turn it off automatically. But if you go back to mask, it's going to select it. Okay, now if I go back to add mode again, everything inside of this shape will be used as part of the image, and everything outside will be discarded. But this is dynamic. This is not destructive by any means. If I delete this mask, the entire image will come back. So that's the basic principle with After Effects. Everything is dynamic over here. Okay, but as you can see, there are white lines and there are a little bit of bleeding here and there. So I can fix it as much as possible using the mask settings, right? Maybe if I do this, oops, I'm selecting the entire thing, which is not something I want. Okay, I want to select this area only. Okay. A few adjustments here and there will be useful, obviously. Okay. But then again, I still have this whiteness, but this is where the mask setting comes in. Okay, I can use the feather, and this feather will give it a soft edge. Let's try 2 pixels. And then also I can use the mask expansion, like -2 pixels. It is going to inset this mask 2 pixels inwards. Maybe that's a bit too much. Let's try 1. And let's try 1 over here as well. Okay. And it went into the, when I clicked enter over here, obviously it opened it up as a layer. Let's turn it off. Let's go back to composition. Okay. Okay, this is good. Maybe a bit more finicking over here could help. Let's try -2 again. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay. But this ball is way too big. Okay. So let's stop playing around with the mask. I'm happy with the result. Okay, let's turn down the scale. Maybe my ball is about like 35. Let's go with 30. It's 30% scale, and it's going to depend on the image you find, obviously. Mine was too large, so I wanted to scale it down so it covers more area in my frame, that I have more space available for bouncing it around. And like everything else here, it is scalable. So you can start a ball in the distance, and as it approaches the camera, it can grow in size, it can scale up, therefore creating the illusion that this ball is coming toward us. You can do stuff like this, okay? But that's not what I want. I'm going to just bounce it across the screen. That's what I want to do. And every time it bounces, it is going to lose some of its energy, and it's going to jump a little bit less, jump to a little bit less height. And it's going to shorten the distances between jumps as well, because it is going to take less time to travel its peak position and less time to travel back to the ground from its peak position. And every time it bounces, it's going to take shorter and shorter time to complete that bounce. Okay? So I need to plan it. I need to plan it somehow. So what I can do over here is, since this is an object, it is going to snap into this line over here, right? If you turn on snap to guides, and this is a guide, its anchor position, its anchor point, think about it like the pivot point in Maya, okay? The pivot position in Maya. It is going to snap to this guide, okay? So if I want the ball to stay here, I have to snap it from underneath it. But maybe that's not an option. Maybe the image is larger than it actually than the actual ball size, and you want to use the grid itself, the anchor point itself as a snapping point. In that case, you can just readjust the grid. Okay, this is good enough. Okay, you can do that as well. Okay, maybe let's go with this for now, right? Now this is good, but I want to start over here, up top somewhere. Okay, and it's going to fall down, rise up, and do this over and over again, doing little bounces in the end, and just slide off screen. Okay, so let's start. I'm going to go over here and hit the stopwatch sign for position. Remember, my time slider is right at the beginning, the 0 frame, 0 seconds, 0 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, 0 frame. Okay, just frame 0, right? Hit the stopwatch sign, and it's immediately going to put a keyframe in this location, recording the X and Y positions of this object. Okay, now I need to slide forwards in time, say half a second later. This ball is going to be over here. Half a second later, it is going to be over here. Half a second later, it is going to be over here. You get the idea. And don't worry about any of this, because I'm going to fine adjust everything later, including the duration of these bounce cycles. Okay? And I'm just doing this by eye. I mean, you can easily track, because you cannot go between frames, obviously. So the time slider already snaps to the appropriate frame. Okay. Let's keep going and keep going. And yeah, almost kissing the ground now. Right? And maybe do just one more little bounce, just a touch. I mean, it's trying to snap, that's why it's hard. We're going to adjust, fine adjust later. And then finally, it is going to move off frame, okay? All right, if you circle back, this is what we got. And we can adjust the positions here later. Don't worry about any of this. Okay, so let's hit space to play back what we have. This is not a bouncing ball. This is just a ball floating, bobbing in midair. It is not realistic. It is not fun. It doesn't have, anticipation. It doesn't have any semblance of truth. So we have to fine adjust it somehow. Now, in order to fine adjust it, these curves, these paths will have to seem different. Now, the ball, when it reaches its zenith, the peak position of a bounce, it is going to be at 0 speed on the y-axis. It is going to go up and stop going up and reverse direction and start to come down. So its y position, the speed of its change, speed of its travel in the y direction will become slower and slower until it reaches 0, and then pick up speed again until it reaches the ground. And when it reaches the ground, it is going to hit it with its most speed and immediately travel upwards once again in the same speed, only in different directions. So that is the type of a curve that we need to draw here, right? It's going to come over here, hit, rise, slow down to 0, hit, rise, slow down, hit, and that's what we want to see. So in order to replicate that motion, we have to set up this interpolation in a way that will replicate that curve. Because going frame by frame to record every position of this ball is a huge waste of time, completely unnecessary. So we have to somehow make sure that these keyframes are interpolated in a way we want. And in order to do that, I'm not going to try to do it over here. I'm going to switch to graph editor. Now the graph editor is empty. I'm not seeing anything because no selected properties. Okay, right now I want to select this. Oh, that was for expressions. So forget about that. But I have to select a property. I have to select an attribute, let's say, in order to see it on the graph. Whatever I select will be visible. Now, scale is 30%. It has no keyframes, and it keeps its 30% position ad infinitum. Okay? Same goes for the anchor point, or the rotation, or the opacity. Okay? No keyframes, no change in time. But if I select the position, we have a bunch of keyframes, and we can see how they are interpolated. Okay? And immediately you can tell what's what. So, for example, if you check out, let's forget about the y direction, which is the green line, okay? And we're going to split them later. Let's talk about just the colors now. Okay, so y direction, it's doing the jumping, and x direction is just traveling in this direction, almost at a constant speed. Until the very end, it picks up speed. So that immediately tells me that in a very unrealistic fashion, towards the end, this ball is inexplicably picking up speed. It's speeding up. So I will have to fix this later. Okay? And also, another thing that tells me is that I don't need all of these keyframes because the speed of x direction is going to be very gradual if any changes happen at all. So I'm going to readjust this later. But in order to work on both of these values, the x values and the y values at different times or in different manners, we have to split these values. If you click here, separate dimensions, it is going to separate this xy value of the position into two distinct values, the x and the y. Okay, now I can select these independently from the associated value, and even I can change the position of this keyframe for x value versus y value. But if they are together, when you select one, it's going to select both. Okay, so that's why it is useful, right? But over here, I want to do something else. I want to somehow adjust these top positions so they create that soft peak. Okay, now I'm going to shift select these points, and it's going to create a bounding box around those points, which you can transform, changing both their values. This is a value graph right now. If you right click, this is the value graph, this is the speed graph. We're going to come to that later. But you can both change the values in this graph, increasing the y value or decreasing the y value, or x value, y value, and change the positions of keyframes in time. You can do both at the same time. You can see that over here. This is time. These are values, 2000 pixels, 1500 pixels, 1000 pixels. These values and time are editable at the same time. But back to this. I want to select these peak positions, right? I don't want to select this though. Okay? I only want to select these positions. Okay? So, and this. And I can only see so much into the future, but if you scrub, these points will appear. Okay? So let's go back. All right? Now, I want to change the interpolation type for these points, for these keyframes. If I right click and select keyframe interpolation, it's going to bring up this menu. And over here, I can select the temporal interpolation from linear to Bezier. Okay? So immediately, we're going somewhere with this. Now, I can adjust these handlebars once again. Okay? And stretch them out a bit. And as you can see, if you get really close, and if you look at the screen, hopefully this comes through from YouTube's compression algorithm, there are very small points here. Each of those points are on a frame, because After Effects is interpolating between the position of this keyframe and the position of this keyframe and filling up all of these frames and in between with interpolated values, with interpolated information. And as you can see, they are gathering at the top, meaning that most of the time this ball spends in the air is going to be close to the top, which is what we want, because as it reaches the top, it is going to slow down, meaning more time will pass towards the top of this peak than near the bottom. So keyframes bunching up together, meaning that this is many frames, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames here and 6 frames over here. Almost half a second is being spent at the top, but using 6 more frames, we are covering twice the distance, right? So speed matters. Okay, so I am adjusting these settings, but this is not going to be enough. I'm also going to have to adjust the location of these keyframes as well. Okay, so what I can do here is simplify things, and I'm going to delete these X values altogether from, start to finish. I can always go in and change the final value. No worries about that. Let's forget about X for now. Let's take a look at Y. Okay? Now, let's watch it. It's almost okay, but at the beginning it's okay. It is acceptable. But towards the end, it does something weird. It takes more and more time to reach the bottom, which is quite unrealistic because gravity isn't changing. Gravity is constant. Remember from your physics lessons in high school, gravity affects all objects regardless of their mass. So it doesn't matter if this is a basketball or a ball made of steel, they're going to fall at the same rate. It could be a bag of, paper. Doesn't matter. It could be bunch of cotton balls. Doesn't matter. It's going to fall at the same rate. Only thing affecting them is the terminal velocity, which is dictated by air drag. And at this distance, it's not going to mean anything, especially for a basketball. So the closer it gets to the ground, the shorter distance, or the shorter time it should take to hit the ground, right? So these areas will have to come closer and closer in terms of their temporal representation. Not spatial, not necessarily. Spatially also they're going to bunch up together, because if it takes less time to hit the ground, it means that less time should be spent moving forward, right? Because if it's traveling in the x direction at a constant speed, these areas should not, these points of hitting the ground should not be resulting in a faster x distance as a result. Okay? So what I'm going to do is basically keep these points closer to each other, both spatially and temporally. Okay? So what I'm going to do is go over here, and let's do this over here because it's going to be much easier. All right? Now this is the X position. Let me delete this keyframe as well. And I'm going to slowly start losing frames. And let's deselect. Now 2 keyframes, why not? Now 3 keyframes. Now 4 keyframes. Now 5 keyframes. Oops. Now 6 keyframes. Now at this point I can do this like 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, just by eye I can tell. Okay. And if you're not happy with this, you can just increase your zoom level, and that's going to help you immensely. I'm just doing it by eye at this point. I'm not even looking at what's going on here, by the way. I'm not concerned with this. I'm not even looking at here. I'm looking at here. Okay. I mean, I can even add one more of this, and a neat trick is if I go over here and copy these keyframes over here, maybe not do that, let's just copy them like so. It's going to do something really weird because the y value is going to be the same between this and that, so I will have to change it, but it's going to work. Okay, so that's good for now. Okay, now what I want to see is how this works spatially. Now temporally, meaning throughout time, in relation to time, we have adjusted this bounce. Let's watch it. Okay, not bad. Maybe could be a bit more drastic towards the end, but whatever, we can fine adjust later. But now it should also travel less and less. Okay? I mean, it is not really doing that. So I will have to adjust the x position as well. Okay? So for example, if I go over to the graph editor and adjust the x, I can use these interpolation methods to make sure that this thing behaves the way it's supposed to. Okay, so I can go to these values, like just select the x position and maybe do something like a easy ease in, meaning that it is going to lose its speed towards the end, but it's going to stretch it out. Since it is going to stretch it out, I want to increase this value just a touch. Sorry, decrease this value just a touch over here. Okay, now it starts to make sense, but it stops over here. So I want it to keep going, and in order to make sure it keeps going, I'm going to go over here, add another keyframe, and adjust its height to about here somewhere. Maybe frame 7, about here. Okay, so I'm going to delete this, and once again make sure that this is easy ease in, and adjust the handlebar like so. I don't want it to stop. I want to move it out of the frame. Okay, so again, make sure it moves out of the frame entirely. If you're not sure, just readjust your position so that you can see. Okay. Towards the end, it needs to be closer. I feel like it. Okay, so let's come over here. Try to readjust. Come on. Okay. Fine adjustments. Let's watch it again. And remember, we didn't touch the X. Not bad. X is getting slower and slower, which is not something I enjoy. So let's grab X again. Make sure this is not as drastic of a speed drop. Okay? Much better. Let's see. Okay, good. Let's say that I am happy with this result. I can always make sure that this starts out of frame, which is very easy. If I go to Y and double click it again to select all of it, I can just hold shift as I'm dragging. Okay, oh sorry, this is the Y value. Okay, I can go to X and do this. Okay, just a little fine adjustment so that it starts over here. Okay, now it comes from outside the frame, bounces. Yeah, maybe needs to be somewhat quicker. Some like this. Okay. So this value has to be set up way forwards. I'm trying to quicken the pace of these. So let's see them together. Let's see what we are doing right now. So as you can see, the Y values, meaning the up direction of this ball, is only happening between frame 0 and 5 seconds and 12 frames, 5.5 seconds. So the bounce of the ball is happening for first 5.5 seconds, but the ball keeps on rolling for a total of 8 seconds. This means that for 2.5 seconds over here, the ball is not bouncing and it's only moving in the X direction, right? So if I keep adding time over here, it is going to stretch this entire animation spatially, right? Because the distance between these points is not dictated by the Y direction. That's only height. But the X direction is controlling where these points are located, both the peak points and the hitting points, right? And I'm talking about it in terms of spatiality. In space, these position of these points are dictated with X. The relative distance horizontally between these points are dictated with X. So if I modify the X, it is going to stretch that animation. I'm not touching the up direction. Whatever I do here, it's never going to change the height of these, but the distance between them will change. Okay? So I can quicken the pace only modifying the X value. Okay? So let's go over here to 8, let's say. But then I also want to increase the amount of travel. So let's go to the very end of it. Make sure that this ball sticks out. So I am shortening the distance between the bounces, right? But at the same time, I am increasing the travel time towards the end of the frame after the bounces end. Okay? So let's go back and watch it again. See how it feels. Much more realistic. More adjustments could be made, but I'm going to stop here because I want to show you other stuff as well. Now, this is good. We bounced the ball. Let's say we are happy with this. You can always fine adjust. Like I said, this is by no means finished, but this is good enough. Let's also rotate it as it bounces, okay? So let's go to rotation. Let's push the slider all the way to the beginning because we are starting over here, remember? Hit the stopwatch sign for the rotation. It's automatically going to create a keyframe, and the rotation value right now is 0. Now, when you rotate something, let me come over here, you can rotate it 360 degrees. But once you're past 360 degrees, it is going to say one full rotation, 1x, plus 8 degrees more. Okay? So this means that I can do full rotations just by typing something here. So let's say, during the course of this ball bouncing, coming inside the frame and coming outside the frame, I want this ball to rotate 5 times. Okay? 5 full rotations. So instead of, turning it over here, let's delete this. Go towards the very end to frame 8. Let me find it just over here. So it takes exactly 8 seconds for this ball to do its action. Okay? Let's type in 5. Okay? And As you can see, as it bounces, the ball is rotating. And obviously, it is also important that once it is traveling on the ground, that this rotation makes sense in terms of its x direction. Because take a look what happens when I, increase it by a lot. Towards the end, it is going to stop making sense. It's rotating as it's traveling, right? And that's not supposed to happen. Okay? So maybe too little, let's say. Maybe 2 rotations. So let's come over here. And right now, it is sliding but not rotating, which is not a behavior we expect to see from a basketball. Okay? This rotation and the lateral horizontal distance traveled should match each other. Okay? In order for it to make sense. And 5 rotations, we're like, yeah, why not? I mean, when I check it around, it's almost okay. But then I also want to do this. I want to go to rotations graph editor, and similarly I want this value to gradually decrease. So what's happening over here is that this is 0 degrees and this is 5 times 360 degrees. Okay, 5 rotations. So, and all the values in between, linearly interpolated. Okay, I want this rotation to decrease more and more as it reaches towards the end of the animation. Okay, so it's going to be picking up speed really fast, or start off really fast and gradually lose speed. So once again, I'm going to do the easy in. Okay, and check out the icons, they are going to make sense. Right? Now, as it reaches towards the ground, it's going to lose speed. But let me switch it to speed graph. Right click on the graph editor, hit speed graph. You can clearly see that it reaches 0 speed, which is not something I want. I don't want this thing to stop. Okay? Because as it moves out of the frame, it is still going at a considerable speed. It is not stopping. So rotation similarly shouldn't stop. If you check out the x position speed towards the end, when right before the animation ends, because there is no more values, okay? There is no more value change here, so there is no change in the value speed, right? If the value isn't changing, the rate at which the value changes is 0, okay? But until that moment, the speed of the value change is not close to 0, okay? But since it is outside the frame, we are not seeing that it is immediately stopping. If it was inside the frame, we would see that it stops dead in its tracks without explanation, because it was just rolling along, right? So similarly, our rotation should replicate this curve. Okay, so let's go back to rotation. Let's go back to, values again, and change this graph to something like this. Okay, it should lose some speed. Yeah, lose some speed, but not exactly all the way down to 0. Okay, so let's check it out. Yeah, that's good. That's very good. So this is your first bouncing ball animation. And I am trying to over-explain, specifically over-explain as much as possible, but I don't want to stop here, okay? So if you're only interested in the bouncing ball animation, good for you. But if you want to learn more about After Effects, keep watching, because I'm going to add a shadow to this, all right? Now, rotation is good, XY is good, I'm happy with these. Now, what about effects? Now, what if I want to add a shadow to this basketball? Okay, let's deselect it. We don't need to see the keyframe path anymore. Okay, so I want to add an effect to this. I want to drop a shadow. So if I type in shadow over the effects panel, I'm going to see the drop shadow. But when I put drop shadow onto this, okay, let me turn off the shape path visibility. Sorry, not that. I don't quite remember where you were able to close this deal. There was a setting to, turn this off, but unfortunately I don't remember. Okay, whatever. Let's keep it in there. No worries. Okay. If I remember how to do that, I'm going to tell you. Okay, let's go to effects, the effect controls, right to project pane, right next to project pane. Okay, and you can find it here as well, effect drop shadows, these settings, because you can change the values over here, animate them. You can, track their keyframes from this line, because that's the only way to animate things in the timeline. But when it comes to dropping the shadow, let's get really close. And let me increase the distance by a bit. And remember, this thing has a rotation, okay? So every time it's rotating, it is going to rotate with its effect, which doesn't make much sense. Not to mention, we don't want this thing's shadow to drop onto the background. We want it to drop onto what we perceive as the ground, not a background image, right? So this drop shadow isn't going to work. You cannot solve everything with effects. So maybe I have to draw my own shadow, okay? So let me find a position, and it's easy to do that, where it hits the ground, okay? This is the point of connection. Realistically speaking, this is the closest this ball gets to what we perceive as the ground, this line over here. And at this point, I want to create a shadow, okay? So what I'm going to do is go to these shape tools and start an ellipse tool, okay? And if I go over here and try to draw an ellipse, it's not going to work because the basketball is selected and it's trying to create a mask onto this, which is not what I want. So I'm going to deselect it, come over here, and snap to this point. But I don't want to draw an ellipse from corner to corner. That's why I'm going to hit Control on my keyboard and draw it like this. Okay? Control, I'm pressing Control and holding right now, draws the ellipse from the center, or draws any shape from its center, as opposed to from corner to corner. Okay? So I can fine adjust later. I'm going to just draw it like this. Okay? Now, it is in a very weird shape. It has a fill of red, a stroke, a very thick 20 pixel stroke around it in white color. I'm going to not use the stroke. Okay? So how am I going to not use the stroke? Well, let's say 0. Okay? We can also go into the shape layer, and inside the shape layer, you will see in addition to the classic transform menu, you see the contents of this shape layer, and inside of it we have an ellipse, and the path of the ellipse is here, but also stroke and fill is also here. Those are dynamic objects. You can change them, and you can even delete them. So if I'm not going to use the stroke, I can just hit delete when the stroke is selected, and the stroke will be gone. If you want to add it later, you can add it from here. These are the type of dynamic modifiers you can add to your shape layer, okay? And you can change all of the values inside of them. We have the path, okay? This, and we have the fill. Now I can change the fill to black, okay? That's good. That is our let's say shadow. It is on top of the ball right now. So first of all, I'm going to right click on this and rename. Always rename your layers. And I'm going to rename to basketball, and I'm going to rename this to background. Okay? Now shadow will be underneath the basketball. That's much better. That's more meaningful, right? And then I'm going to create an effect for this. This is very sharp. I want it to be soft. So I'm going to search for blur over here, and you're gonna get the phone book, especially with my plugins. But over here we have the blur sharpen. These are the effects you have available. Forget about the BCC. Okay, over here I have the Gaussian blur, one of the most useful, my favorite blurs. Let's go over to Gaussian blur, drag and drop over it to shadow, and in here I have to adjust the blurriness. But as I adjust it, it's going to create this weird shape, box around it. Just deselect repeat edge pixels and it's going to work just fine. Okay? And adjust it however you wish. Like this is good, a nice contact shadow, right? But this is right now a static object. It is only here, it only makes sense at this point in time where the ball touches the ground. I wanted this thing to be traveling alongside the ball at the same rate, at the same speed, attached to it. I don't want to have to adjust its XY position. I don't want to animate it. I want it to behave with the ball. Okay? So what I can do here is, let's turn off the contents. Let's go to transform and let's open up basketball's transform as well. Okay? Now, basketball's transform already has an X position, right? So what if I can attach this X position to the X position of this? If I go into the position of the shadow and right click and select separate dimensions, now since I don't want to change the Y position because this shadow will only appear as the ball touches the ground and only appear on the ground where the ball touches, let's say it more effectively, the Y position will not change. It's not going to travel up and down. It's only going to travel left to right. Okay? So the Y position should follow this Y position. But take a look. Even though they are occupying the same space in this frame, those values are not close. Like this Y position is 840 and this Y position is 540. This happens. Every object has its own anchor position. Every object works, relative to the framing of this. Like, as you can see, the 0 point for this frame, for this file, is right here. 0, 0 is right here. This is the origin of this canvas. Okay? And turns out, because of the scale differences and everything, right now the Y position of the ball is 840 and the Y position of the shadow is 540, even though, visually speaking, they are exactly at the same spot in terms of their X values, right? So if I attach this to this, it's not going to work. Let's try. See this pick whip? Click on it and drag and grab this Y position. But immediately, this Y, sorry, not for the X, not for the Y, sorry, for the X. X position, okay? Grab the pick whip to the X and grab this X position. And they are different as well, as you can see. Now, it is way over there, okay? It is way over there. So I have to fix this now. And the way you can fix it is if you adjust the anchor point, and this is X and Y values, you can bring this back. Okay? This is good. But here is the problem. The anchor position of this object is no longer in the middle of it. Okay? It's over here somewhere, which is not what I want. Because I want to write an expression. And in writing that expression, I'm going to control the scale of this shadow. As the ball flies upwards, the shadow is going to enlarge and lose its opacity until it completely disappears. And once it reaches the ground again, it is going to scale down to this final size and reach its maximum opacity. Okay? And the scaling operation and position operation and rotation operation, similar to how it is in Maya, is done according to this anchor point. Remember how I mentioned, think about this as the pivot point in Maya, same deal. Okay? So if I rotate this object, it is going to rotate, as you can see, around that anchor point. Okay? So I can do two things. One, I can do this and then change its height, or better yet, I can go ahead and select this tool, pan behind, parentheses, anchor point, shortcut Y. When you select this, without changing the position of this object, you can position its anchor point, like so. Okay. Now, if I rotate it or scale it, it is going to do it from that center, which is what I want to see. Okay. Now, what is going on here? Let's watch from the beginning. Now, that's good and all, but yeah, that's not how a shadow works. A shadow only appears when objects, get really close together, especially during ambient lighting scenarios. Like this is outside. There is nothing to cast a very direct, very sharp shadow. Take a look around. Like there's not much shadows anyway. This is an overcast day. So this is way too much shadow anyway. We're going to fine adjust it later. But in the meantime, it has to enlarge and disappear as the ball, the thing, the object that is casting the shadow, moves further away from where the shadow is being cast, namely the ground. Okay? So I have to adjust it, and I can do that with what is called expressions. Okay? I can write small codes, very small mathematical equations to take a value that I have already animated and translate so it changes a value that I want to animate but couldn't be bothered to play around with. Let's talk about scale first. So when this thing reaches to its upper positions, let's say, I want the scale to increase and I want this, opacity to decrease. Okay? That's what I want to achieve. Let's write it. So let me go over here somewhere, doesn't matter, okay? And let's read the values. This is the lowest position this ball will ever going to take, okay? Y position 840. Take a look. Every time it touches the ground, it's 840. Anywhere in between, it changes positions, okay? But anytime it touches the ground, it is 840. And the highest position is not a concern, because somewhere in the middle, somewhere halfway, like 550, let's say, I want this shadow to completely disappear. Its opacity to drop to 0. That's what I want to see, okay? And its scale will reach maximum because any point beyond that will be, completely unnecessary since its opacity will already reach 0 and it's going to disappear. So even if scale changes, we're not going to see it because the opacity is 0. Okay? So let's take care of the opacity first. I want to take the value range between 840 and around 550. Okay? So let me demonstrate. We have a value range of, doesn't matter, by the way, these values are just arbitrary. You can apply these values to your own. That's the entire point. Okay? So let me grab a pen. We have a value range of 840 to 550. Between them is a difference of, what is it, 290 something? It's 840 minus 550, yeah, 290, okay? There's a value range of 290, completely arbitrary. Once again, yours could be different, doesn't matter, okay? What I want to see is this information translated to a value range of 100 opacity to 0 opacity. Because once this ball reaches 840, right here, or right here, doesn't matter, okay? The shadow will be at maximum opacity. It is going to be the most opaque, 100% opaque. You cannot go above it, don't worry about it. If you type in 110, After Effects will automatically convert it to 100. You cannot have minus opacity or anything above 100%, okay? And when it reaches 550 mark, completely arbitrary, my choice, okay? It's going to reach 0. Now, how do I translate this value range to this? Well, it's very easy. That's what we call normalizing values. Okay? So I want to, first of all, get this value, the maximum range, the range between the minimum and maximum values. The range, like the range of 0 to 100. The distance between 0 to 100 is 100. And the distance between 550 to 840 is 290. Okay? So what I'm going to do is consider opacity. And this is the y value. Consider the opacity as x. Okay? X equals, let's talk about the value range. The maximum value, which is y, or let's say the y value, minus 550 divided by the value range, 290, okay, but multiply by the maximum value of the opacity. Okay, so what we are doing here is let's track the numbers. If y value is 840, you subtract 550 from 840, which is 290, okay? Then you divide it by 290, which gets you 1. You multiply 1 by 100, you get maximum opacity, okay? And what is the middle point of this? Or let's say, let's do the 0 first. Let's imagine that this value is 550. 550 minus 550 is 0. 0 divided by 290 is 0. 0 multiplied by 100 is 0. Okay? Let's do the middle ground. Let's say, the middle point is 145, so plus this, 985. 550, 695. 695 minus 550 is 145. 145 divided by 290 is 0.5. 0.5 times 100 is 50, exactly half opacity. So this is one-to-one linear translation of these values through what we call normalization. We are normalizing this value range, and we are transposing that normalized value range into the opacity. Okay? Now, the only thing left is to write this somewhere. Okay? So opacity will equal the translate y value of the ball minus 550 divided by 290 times 100. Okay? Let's go to After Effects. I want to animate the opacity using that expression. Hit Alt and hold in your keyboard. Click the stopwatch sign. That is going to turn on this expression editor. Just quick, dirty expression editor. Okay? Now, it is right now set to transform opacity, which means the transform opacity for this layer. Okay? But I don't want to play around with this layer's transform opacity. Instead, I want to get this, the Y position of the ball. So instead, I'm going to pick whip this, and it's going to automatically adjust the naming itself. This comp, the composition we are in, the bouncing ball composition, layer, basketball, okay? And from that basketball, take the transform Y position, okay? That data right now is written, all right? And this is, remember the 890, right? So get this and subtract 550 from it, and then divide it by 390. Let's always use the parentheses, okay? Then make sure this is multiplied by 100. All right? And that's it. You can add the semicolon if you want. If you want to do another, line of code, then you need the semicolon. If you don't, if you're not using another line, doesn't matter. Okay? All right. Now, what did I do wrong? Let's see. This is 840. Y position minus 550. Let me check if everything is all right. Oh, 290, my bad. Sorry, this is not 390, 290. Okay, okay, 100%, as you can see. But somewhere along the line, around when it reaches 550, it disappears. Okay? And this keeps happening over and over again because this is dynamic now. This animation is being calculated on this expression for each frame. Every time that value changes, doesn't matter if it changes, it is being calculated. This After Effects is looking at this expression saying, oh, okay, so I'm going to try to transform Y position. I'm only interested in that, putting it through this mathematical equation that we just wrote, and then applying it to this opacity. It's that easy. And now we can do it for the scale. Now for the scale, things get interesting. Here's the deal. We don't have to play around with this anymore. We don't need to. We already have the opacity adjustment, right? We already normalized this value, 100 to 0, right? The only thing that we need to do to get it normalized again is just divide it by 100. So what we want to do is this. Let's assume we have the opacity. Okay, 100 to 0. Now we will have scale. Now here's the deal. The scale in this case is already 100, and we don't want to decrease it to 0. Instead, we want to increase it to something even bigger, right? As this thing approaches its peak position, we want the scale not to decrease, but to increase, right? As it loses its opacity. We want it to increase, like maybe at the peak position, maybe 200%, or let's keep it small, let's say 150%, okay? We want this thing to go from 100 to 150. So how do we do this? Because it is an inverse correlation right now. As the opacity reaches 0, the scale should reach 150, okay? So the range will be something like this, scale 100 to 150. So how do we transpose these values? It is relatively simple once you start thinking mathematically. So let's think about opacity in terms of x and scale in terms of y, okay? So y, the scale, is something something, but let's begin with what we know. If we divide x by 100, we will basically get 1 to 0. Okay? 1 to 0 value. Fully normalized value. Now, there's a very clever mathematical operation that inverses this value range really easily. That is called the 1 minus operation. If you get a value range of 1 to 0 and subtract it from 1, you get a value range of 0 to 1. So in order to inverse this from 0 to 1, you only have to do this, 1 minus. Okay? Now, the value of 1 will be 0 and the value of 0 will be 1. And any values in between will be completely flipped. Okay? That's the idea. This is the 1 minus operation. And you have this in coding as well. Okay? Now we have this, but we have a range of 100 to 150. So how much is that change? Only 50, right? 0 to 50 essentially. So if you multiply this by 50 and then add it to 100, okay, we get a value range of 100 to 150. Let's write this now. So let's go to scale. But here's the problem. Scale, let's type this 100. Scale is a double value. It is scale in x and scale in y. So when I alt-click this and pick whip this opacity, it is going to write in a temp value for applying it to both x and y. Okay, because I need a double value, but right now I am introducing a single value. So not Maya, After Effects is automatically adding this line to apply it to both X and Y scales. Okay? So what I'm going to do is just this. Like, let's start with the parentheses. Okay? Transform opacity. Okay? Divided by 100. So this is the normalized value. Then parentheses -1, close parentheses, times 50, once again parentheses, plus 100. I don't need parentheses anymore. Okay? Now what I'm doing here is transform opacity divided by 100. This is normalized value. 1 minus operation flips it, inverses it, creating the inverse correlation. Times 50. 50 is the value range of how big this scale is going to get, plus 100, so that it reads from not to 0 to 50%, but 100 to 150%. Okay? So it's that easy. Now, when you check it out, and the best thing about this is we are not animating with keyframes. You don't like the scaling? Okay, make it bigger then. That's it. Right now, it is like 200% towards the end. Want to make it bigger? Go bigger. Okay. Now the value range is between 100 and 300%. Right? Because I'm also adding the 100 to 200. Right? And that's how you do it. Let's keep this a little more subdued, like 75. Okay? And also the same applies for opacity as well. But if you change the opacity from anything, okay, if you break the 0 to 100 value range, remember you are using the 0 to 100 range for an application over here. If you want to control, if you want to change the opacity from anything, let's say I want to use this value range of not 0 to 100, but say 0 to 75, since you are sampling this value range over here, this will also change. Be aware of that. The other option is to resample the transform Y position once again, like minus 550 divided by 290, and then subtract it from 1. Okay? Then you will sample the same source, not resample it. So if I were to do this, let me grab this area and change it with transform opacity, like so. Okay? And it doesn't like this comp layer, unfortunately. It happens. Okay? So instead of that, let me grab this. Let's change the scale to this. Okay. All right. And then 1 minus operation. Okay. All right. Now nothing has changed, but I am no longer sampling the opacity. So I can go over here, and instead of a maximum of 100% opacity, I can just say 75%. Okay. When it reaches the ground, it is only reaching a maximum of 75%. Okay? And I can even lower it more to match the surrounding opacity. Okay? Very subdued. All right? So I can turn off the guides, show guides. I can turn them off. And let's watch it. That's it. That's how you do a bouncing ball animation. Now, in this tutorial, you have learned how to control objects in your project, how to open up composition, how to transform their properties, how to animate those transform properties, how to use the graph editor, speed, value, controlling dimensionality separately, adjusting keyframes, adjusting interpolation types, adjusting their locations in the graph and in the timeline. In addition to all of that, you have added an additional shape layer, not to mention masks, and used expressions to control animations by inheriting different values from completely different objects. Do all of that, and I promise, basically, this is it. This is After Effects. The rest is up to you. Of course, we're going to hold your hand throughout the entire process, but you learn the basic principles of this, applying all of these you learned here. The rest will be a walk in the park. All right? One final thing, we have to render this out. Okay? So, select your bouncing ball composition, hit export at the render queue. Okay? And now we have to set it up. I'm going to share these render settings with you. Okay? Render setting, best, don't touch any of this. Go to output module, okay, and select H264. Video output is RGB, millions of colors, blah, blah, blah. Audio output, we are not using audio, so just turn it off. Format options, go over here, okay. These settings are completely fine. Switch the target bitrate to either VBR, one pass, CBR, doesn't matter. I usually prefer CBR, and target bitrate 10 is good enough, okay. Hit OK. And make sure that your composition isn't too long, because otherwise you're going to be rendering a huge amount for no reason. This is going to render the entire thing, remember? Because, take a look, I have 10 seconds, but my animation usually stops at 8 seconds, okay? If you want to shorten down the amount of render time and there's nothing happening in this 2 seconds and you don't need it, you can always go to Bouncing Ball and change it from here, or you can use this as well. Just slide this, okay, maybe to 8.5 seconds, so we have a stopping time over here, right? 8.5 seconds, that's good. You can Control Shift X to cut the composition to that. Okay? Or you can do it from here. Trim comp to work area. This is your work area, okay? Trim comp to work area, Control Shift X does this. Let's go to render queue, okay? Output, we have to set it up. So bouncing ball, MP4, follow the naming standards with your name and project and all of that. I'm going to, give you all the details. Save it, hit render, and since this is a very basic file, it's going to render really quickly, okay? And that's it. Failed to write XMP data. We don't care about XMP data. Let's go to Bouncing Ball and let's watch it. Ta-da! See you next time.